Thanks everyone for being here. It's my pleasure to speak to everybody. And today I'm going to highlight one of the great aspects of forage legumes in livestock systems, which is adding nitrogen to the whole system. Those are perhaps the two main reasons for introducing forage legumes into livestock systems. They are able to associate with soil microorganisms and add some nitrogen into the system, and they also have great forage nutritive value. I want to remind everybody that we have plenty of nitrogen in the air. It's like 78% of the air that you breathe. It's nitrogen, but it's not available for plants to uptake. So that nitrogen needs to be reduced in forms that the plants can use. And there are different ways to do, but the biological nitrogen fixation it's a major way to do it. Another way is to just add fertilizer that is made in the industry. And there are different cycles and interactions, but nitrogen, there's plenty of nitrogen in the air, but plants cannot take it up. And is also one of the most limiting element in the agroecosystems. So forage legumes can do the trick because they associate with rhizobia bacteria. And there are different factors affecting the biological nitrogen fixation. And I'm not getting to that today. We have only 20 minutes, but one of the keys to have legume in the pasture, you need to have at least a common target is to have at least 30% of forage legumes in the botanical composition. Because first you need to have the legume, you need to have the legume to grow, and you have that legume have to have a good nitrogen concentration. Most of that nitrogen needs to come from the air. A lot of people ask, so how does the nitrogen from the legume get transferred to the grass? So if you're talking about grazing systems, there are different ways. For example, the livestock, they love legumes. In this picture here on the right, you have Perino peanuts on strips and bahia grass. And, during some months of the year, we track that, and 60, 70% of the diet comes from the legumes. But anyhow, they eat the legume and they return 80 to 90% of whatever they eat to the system, through the excreta, through the dung and urine. Although the distribution is not perfect, but at least they return, most of that nitrogen, and that can, fall, close to the grass, and the grass can use it. Another way is to the plant litter. Whatever they not eat, it just deposits on the ground as senescent plant material and decays over time, also bringing the nitrogen back to the system. Also, the below ground processes, they're huge. A lot of different processes going on, and you're learning more about those processes now here at the center. We have a great group of people, and now we're trying to investigate more. Some of that, some direct root exudation and mycorrhiza, they all play a role in transferring that nitrogen from the legume to the grass. I want to show this video I got from a producer from South Florida a couple of weeks ago. You're gonna see the video, it's a Gix Bermuda grass without Perino Peanut. And in the neighboring field, just, in the same field, we have another section of the field that has Gix Bermuda grass and Perino Peanut. You're gonna see the difference of that. And I'm gonna play that now. I hope you can see it. So this is Gix without Perino Peanut. No peanut.
We get to there where there's starting to be some peanut, and then we see plenty of peanut in with the grass. Huge difference.
So this picture shows that the combination of grass and legumes is not only about the nitrogen, but also a lot of synergistic effects that are going on below ground, some of them, like you see in the picture on the right, some mycorrhiza, they also can do the trick and transfer some of those resources from legume to the grass. So what is the typical biological nitrogen fixation from clovers here in the Southeast? I'm gonna address some of that because we measure some of this in some of our research here in Marianna. But first, I would like to mention how we do it. If you think like a legume plant has two major pools of nitrogen to pull from. One is the air, if it's fixing that nitrogen, if the legume plant is fixing the nitrogen. The other one is from the soil. So there are stable isotopes present in both the air and the soil, but the isotopic composition in the air is by definition 0 because the air is the standard, and the soil is typically enriched. So by analyzing the plant, we can tell how much of that nitrogen comes from the air, or how much was fixed, and how much comes from the soil. You also can need, you need to use some reference plants, but anyhow, we have the equipment to do that, and we've been doing some of that research here in Marianna. When I got here, I did a lot of research on forage legumes to see which one would be a better fit for the region. This trial brought my attention. We have here annual ryegrass without nitrogen fertilizer on the left, as you can see. So it's pretty poor and not producing much. And then you have mixtures of ryegrass with Bersin clover. And you can see here on the right, crimson clover and annual ryegrass. And again, this was planted in the same time with the same management and the same fertilization. In all of these cases, we did not apply any nitrogen. And you can see here how beautiful not only the legume is, but also how beautiful the grass is. And that grass was not under grazing, was a small plot trial. So that was really interesting to see. So we did some of that work, and here's the data. The total dry matter yield of those plots, the ryegrass with crimson clover was the best one here for Marianna. And look at the difference between these mixtures, this mixture and the annual ryegrass without any legume and no nitrogen fertilization. So it's a huge difference. So the clover produced a lot, and here the better ones were crimson and Bersin clover. But also the ryegrass produced a whole lot more whenever it was mixed with the clover, especially with the crimson clover. So the combination of ryegrass and crimson clover was pretty good. In this trial, if you multiply the dry matter yield by the nitrogen concentration, you have the nitrogen yield. And most of that nitrogen came from fixation in the case of the clover here. At the end, it fixed almost 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre just above ground. So we're not considering here the below ground component, which also has some nitrogen there that is also recycled back to the system. So this clover, it was the best case scenario here with crimson clover was almost 50 pounds per acre. We did some greenhouse studies to understand a bit more that beautiful combination of ryegrass and crimson clover. So we came up with this design of age plots and tried to understand that. So the work of Luana Queiroz, one of our graduate students doing her master. So we planted on one side the legume, the other side we planted the grass. These pots are connected, as you can see here. They are like they're in an age shape. And then we did some enrichment of one side with label nitrogen gas to study the transfer of nitrogen, from the legume to the grass. And it was a pretty interesting study. We were able to see that transfer, and again confirm the results of the field. The grass biomass, the grass produced much more whenever we're connected with the clover in this type of pots, because the roots actually were all over the place here. They are connecting to each other, and a lot of mycorrhiza also happened there. So the grass produced much more whenever it was connected to the legume compared to whenever the grass was growing in a separate pot. even the grass nitrogen concentration was higher whenever the grass was growing together with the clover. So that tells that the clover is sharing resources with that grass, even in this case here where we don't have grazing animals recycling back. So there are some connections going on below ground, and you're going to have more to tell about that in the near future. We also have the benefit to grow summer legumes here. One of them that you're studying here is the sun hemp as an annual legume. So those were two different varieties that we studied, crescent sun and blue leaf. Crescent sun was better in this case. And at the end, the fixation was around 30 to 40 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And again, on the above ground component. So that was pretty good for annual legume, plus whatever the roots, and there are a lot of roots in the sun hemp. How about Perino peanut? Perino peanut has a huge root rhizome below ground biomass, and that is interesting to see. So this was a small plot trial, as you can see on the background, the plots. So it was a small plot, and it was solid peanut, it was not mixed with grass. And you measure the nitrogen fixation per year. We did 3 harvests per year. We repeated that in 2 different years. And it was a lot of nitrogen. You know, the top 2 varieties, UF Tiro and UF Peace, there was more than 200 pounds of nitrogen of fixed per year in those cases. And even the Florida Grays, which perform a little, you know, less than the other ones, we still had 120, 130 pounds of nitrogen per year, which is pretty good. So that tells, you know, the potential of perennial peanut. But remember, if in a grazing system, you're mixing the peanut with the grass, so not everything is peanut. So it, depending on the percentage of peanut in the botanical composition, you're gonna get way less fixation than this. So if you have, you know, 20, 30% of perennial peanut in the system, you're gonna get something close to, you know, 20, 30, 40 pounds per year. But we also got curious about the roots and rhizomes because, of course, it depends on the old of the stand. You know, as it gets older, it has a huge mat of roots and rhizomes, which was the case in that study. As you can see here, those different varieties, they have something like ranging from 10 to up to 20 pounds of organic matter per acre of just, you know, root and rhizome mass below ground in the top 8 inches of soil. And that root and rhizome biomass, it has a good, you know, percentage of nitrogen, you know, from 1.5 to 2% of nitrogen. So if you multiply this percentage of nitrogen times the amount of biomass, you come up with this pool of nitrogen that is below ground. It doesn't mean that this pool is available because, you know, not all the root system turn over every year. So we got curious, okay, how much of these, you know, 200, 300 pounds of nitrogen becomes available every year and gets recycled back to the system? So we kind of tried to put all of those questions together, assessing these grazing systems here in Marianna. We've been doing that since 2014. These are a different approach. We strip planted the perennial peanut into the Bahia grass pastures. So this ecoturf perennial peanut and Argentine Bahia grass pastures, we planted them back in 2014. And we've been doing some grazing research since then. So we measure different things here and we have very good data from all of those years. So the system is a grass legume based system where in the summer we have what you see there, the perennial peanut and Bahia grass. And in the winter, we oversee this system with cool season grass. We did that with oat and rye, and this last couple of years we are doing with oat and ryegrass. And we also add a blend of clovers. We have crimson, red, and ball clovers. And in the winter, we add 30 pounds of nitrogen after we plant the cool season forages 3 to 4 weeks after we plant them, just to get them going. So in summary, this whole system here, it only receives 30 pounds of nitrogen per year. So it's not much, and it's just to help the cool season forage to come up faster during the winter. So we measured the biological nitrogen fixation for the clovers and for the perennial peanut in that system. And that's only the above ground biomass of clovers and above ground fixation. We got on average 36% of clovers in our botanical composition, and on average 34 pounds of nitrogen per acre, fixed by the clovers. And I'm not accounting here for the below ground nitrogen that is also there. The perennial peanut, because the animals, they just, graze a lot, close this perennial peanut, so the average accumulation of the peanut was not very high. But even though it helped with 14 pounds of nitrogen per year, and you had around 32% of rhizoma peanut in the botanical composition. So if you sum up those two numbers, if you put them together, you got almost 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year, fixed by those legumes. And again, we have the below ground biomass, and we measure that for the peanut using this cage technique. This is the work of Eric Santos, a PhD student. Eric did a lot of work in different things, and that's one of the things that he measured. And it was a lot of work to do that. He had to sample several times for 2 years. But he did come up with a number of about 20 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year was the contribution of the below ground biomass of the rhizoma peanut, assuming 30% of rhizoma peanut in the botanical composition. If it was 100% of peanut, it was much more than this, would be 60 to 70 pounds. But since we had only 30% of peanut in the botanical composition, the contribution was around 20 pounds of nitrogen per year. We also have other inputs like the below ground biomass from the clovers. In this case, we had the 30 pounds of nitrogen input from fertilizer. And we also have the inputs from the soil organic matter mineralization. And we assume that are negligible atmospheric deposition of nitrogen. But the beauty of this system, as you see here in this picture on the right, is that you have a range of different species. This is the transition between the spring and the summer, where you still have some of the clovers and some of the cool season grasses phasing out, but you have the perennial peanut coming up, and the bahia grass as well coming up. So that's a pretty interesting system. So when you put all together all of those numbers, you have the contribution of biological nitrogen fixation from clovers, from perennial peanut, the below ground from peanut as well, decay, plus the fertilizer. So this system is, receiving, around 98 pounds, almost 100 pounds plus whatever you didn't measure what's the contribution from the organic matter in the below ground clover. So I would expect somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 to 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Another student, Lisa Garcia, who already finished her PhD, she measured how much was the nutrient cycling in that system that I just described, which is this third one here, this grass and clover and rhizoma peanut. Sorry, let me go back. Okay. Yeah. So this was the system that I just described, and she compared to another two systems. The first one would be the grass and nitrogen only without any legume. This system here, grass and nitrogen, received 200 pounds of nitrogen compared to only 30 pounds of nitrogen from fertilizer of the legume system. So this one had 200 pounds of nitrogen per year. This in the middle was grass and clover, which was bahia grass without peanut during the summer, and a similar blend of clovers and cool season grass in the winter as the third system, and received only 30 pounds of nitrogen. But the main thing here in this slide is the amount of nitrogen that cycles back to the system through the feces and through the urine. We measure the fecal output and the urine output of each one of those systems, and also measure the concentration of nitrogen in the feces and in the urine. So at the end, for example, this grass and nitrogen system received back almost 80 pounds or 80 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. But this one received 200 pounds of nitrogen per year, right? And had almost 80 pounds, 80 kilos back. The legume system just received 30 pounds of nitrogen, but recycled back almost, a similar amount. And at the end, I'm going to show the numbers in terms of livestock performance was actually very similar, actually a little bit better for the legume system. What I'm trying to make the case here is that the nitrogen cycling from organic deposition, like the biological nitrogen fixation and litter turnover, it's much more efficient than the nitrogen input from fertilizer. We know that the nitrogen fertilizer efficiencies is around 50 to 60%, 70% at the best case scenario. So we already lose a lot when you're applying that fertilizer. While here, those residues are more slow decay type of residue, and they're more efficient. David Jaramillo, another student, a PhD student, I think I saw David was there in the audience. David measured the litter contribution in those systems, and they are not very different across systems. And it was around 40 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. But both excreta, feces, urine, and litter, I consider them internal cycling. They are not really inputs from outside, but they are important because they keep the system moving. So just to give you a perspective on the animal performance of those different systems, we had that's the whole year, putting together the winter and the summer. So we can see here that average daily gain per year, the average of that system, it got close, was 1.5 pounds per day for the grass legume system. It was a little lower in the grass plus clover, it was not significant. If you analyze winter and summer separately, the summer was way better here for this system because of the Perino Peanut. But then you see the gain per area in terms of pounds per acre, you see that we are able to produce at least, similar, it was not significant, was similar amount of livestock gain per area with only 30 pounds of nitrogen per year compared to 200 pounds of nitrogen per year. And that tells, the importance of this input of nitrogen from legumes into those systems. And yes, the stocking rate was a little lower in this grass legume system, but the average daily gain was better, and at the end, you produce similar livestock gain. I'm getting at the end of my 20 minutes. So forage legumes are key to enhance sustainability of forage livestock system in Southeast USA. I think we have such a great opportunity in this region here to grow forages and specifically have many different legume options to use in the cool season, in the warm season, and we need to take advantage of that. The forage legumes, they provide different benefits, such as adding nitrogen to the system, improving the livestock diet, and they also provide other ecosystem services. And as I show with the numbers, the nitrogen cycling is so much more efficient when you're using grass legume system compared to nitrogen fertilizer. And at the end, you have a greater, a very good performance of the animals and of the system in general. I'm very glad to be here working with this great forage team that you have at UF. And I also very lucky to have a very good team of people, bright young people that help us to put forward our program and at the end help the livestock industry.
First question, how long does the nitrogen remain in the soil after clovers or other annual legumes decay. So if you're a future crop, if you're gaining some nitrogen from those legumes, how long do you have to really take advantage of that nitrogen?
That's a good question. And well, the beauty of this recycling of legume tissues, well, like I said, the major pathways are litter and excreta. If the litter is decaying, it's a slow release kind of deal. It's different than applying fertilizer from the bag. So it stays long enough, Doug, but the major losses are through livestock excreta. That's the other important pathway, and especially urine is a hotspot for losing nitrogen. So, for example, if you have a system that you're applying fertilizer, if you stop applying fertilizer, I've done that calculation and simulations before. After 2-3 years, it's gone. I mean, the residual effect is not very long. But in legumes, that's the beauty, especially if you have perennial legumes, it stays there and keep moving the system forward.
All right, and Alfredo responded too that he'd done some work that they found up to 70 days afterwards for N and potassium. All right, next question. How much litter nitrogen reaches the soil?
We've done, like I mentioned, David Jaramillo measured some of that litter deposition in those systems. It was 40 to 50 pounds per year, the amount that was deposited. And also in the first year, typically 50 to 70% of that litter decays over time. But some of that nitrogen is recalcitrant and it stays a little longer. But that's typically the amount that we measure here in terms of the litter contribution. But again, there is also the below ground litter, which is important as well. And you haven't measured the ones from the clover, which is also a big contribution. That's the missing link there.
All right, next question. With so many forage species in your year-round grass, Perino peanut, cool season forage, is weed control problem?
All right, that's a good question. We typically don't have much problem during the winter, Doug, because the stand is typically good and covers well the soil. Sometimes we do have problems during the summer, especially on the strips of Perino peanut, because the animals tend to overgraze those strips because they prefer peanut over bahia. So we do have some weed problems on the strips. But there are some one of the things of the strips is that you can use herbicides for peanut on those strips, and that helps a little bit. But yes, we do have some problems, especially during the summer. Not much during the winter.
All right, thank you. Next question. Do you think you'll be able to develop a year-round grazing system with all the forages you're experimenting with? Do you think you'll come up with something that minimizes hay to the point we got grazing year-round?
Yes, that's our goal. 365 days of the year grazing. And I think, well, with this system that I just described, there is a window, from mid to late October until mid-January that we cannot put animals there because, we overseed with the cool season, and then we need to wait a little bit until those plants are good again, up and running for grazing. But then we just, establishing limpo grass in different areas here. And I think the limpo grass can bridge the gaps. You can graze stockpile limpo grass during this time of the year from, October to January. Limpo grass is also one of the first ones to green up during the spring. So if you have some gaps in that, time of the year as well, you could use it. So that could be another piece that you could play in this region here that could, be the missing link and bridge the gaps and You know, my philosophy is that grazing is typically cheaper than other practices. So I would advise everybody, if you can, go grazing. And I think we'll have that answer in a year, because you're developing a couple of years, you know, to have more data. But I'm pretty sure you can graze 365 days of the year here in the Panhandle if you have a system with limpo grass and these other things that we just mentioned here.
All right, thank you. Next question: when you use grass legume mixtures, do you use strips of the legume that you broadcast to establish them? And what is the persistence you achieve with these mixtures?
For the winter, we do not do strips. We just seed the whole thing together. You know, the grass and the legumes, and they are all mixed together. And like I think I showed the data for the clovers, we typically have 35, 34%, 30 to 35% of clovers in the botanical composition, which is, I think, is right on target. We also want the grass, you know, to be part of the system, so that's important. But in the summer, we did use the approach of strip planting the perennial peanut. And the reason for that, that's a practice that you're trying to use because it saves on the cost of establishment. So instead of planting the whole area with perennial peanut, you can plant just 50% of the area if you do the strip planting, and with time, you know, the peanut also spreads. So the clovers, they are annual, so there's no problem with the persistent. But the peanut, yes, they're pretty persistent. I mean, once you establish them, they stay there. They're, you know, we have perennial peanut on the grazing at the Beef Research Unit for more than 40 years. You know, perennial peanut plant back in the early 80s, still, you know, being grazed and under very good condition. So that's the way we do here.
All right, thank you. Next question: what percentage of the root mass is recycled or dies or decays each year? So I think they're referring to like the perennial peanut. It's a perennial. What percentage of the root mass is recycled each year?
That's a very good question, and we measure that. I don't have the exact number at the top of my head, Veron, but I think it was around 30%, 20 to 30% per year in the case of perennial peanut. Well, we measure the roots from perennial peanut, not the roots from the clover. I would expect, you know, much more than that. But the perennial peanut, because it's a perennial species and there is a huge amount of root and below ground biomass, it was around 20 to 30%. But the clovers, I would expect, you know, everything to recycle since it works as an annual species. So in my opinion, it's a large contribution to the system, and we still need to measure that here. How much would be the contribution from the root turnover and root decay from clovers?
All right, last question in the chat. Using so many species, is there a risk of overgrazing one species over another?
In terms of the clovers, right? The question was. So we use the blend of clovers for a particular reason. They grow in different times of the season. For example, the crimson clover is the earliest one. Red clover is the later one, and bog clover is kind of in the middle. So it kind of spread the growth of those clovers along the season. And they really love all those clovers, so they don't prefer one. At least I haven't noticed. But especially because they grow at different times of the season. So that's the main goal here, is to try to spread that growth. But we do have problems, as I mentioned, during the summer, where they prefer the perennial peanut over the bahia. So that's one of the drawbacks of the strip planting, to be honest, is that they have more opportunity to select compared to a situation where you could have, you know, a blend of grass and peanut all together. It would be more difficult for the selection to occur. So that's one of the things in the strip planting. But you can probably solve that by managing the cattle, you know, doing increasing a little bit the stocking density and moving it forward, maybe for rotational stocking, you could solve that that issue. But in our setup here, we're doing continuous stocking because of the need to measure the the livestock performance and things like that. But I'm sure we could do a better job in terms of doing a rotational stocking and probably reducing a little bit this selection, which would probably reduce a little bit the livestock performance as well. But at least you could perhaps use more efficiently the barrier grass.
Ken Quisenberry, I had a conversation early on in my career with Dr. Bill Duncan. Gary Lacefield will remember that name. Bill was a physiologist, and with the discussion was how much nitrogen will a legume fix? And Bill's astute answer to that was just as much as it needs for optimum growth and not a bit more. And I think what that says, and I think he's accurate, is the better we can do with legume production, the better we're going to do with nitrogen fixation. So our nitrogen fix is always going to be fairly highly correlated with total biomass. Now there's some wash in that, but in general, the better job we can do with producing legumes, the more nitrogen we're going to fix.
That's 100% right, Dr. Q. And yeah, so nitrogen fix depends on the biomass production, nitrogen concentration, and the percentage that comes from the atmosphere. So those are the numbers that you need to play. So the more they grow, the more nitrogen they have, and the better the fixation. And again, it's tricky when you're on the grazing and you have grass mixed with that and animal selection and all that combined. So all of those things, they interact with each other. And but that's a good challenge to measure those things.
One more comment quickly, and this is kind of a look into the future, but in terms of weed control, we have struggled here down in the peninsula of Florida with winter weeds in our legume plots, particularly if we're just growing pure legumes, yield plots and so forth. And we're are excited about the possibility of our 2,4-D tolerant red clover coming on that might give us some other options for weed control.
Yeah, I know that's an issue here, the Panhandle, the wild mustard and things like that. It's a big problem in some areas. We don't have here at the station a lot of problems, but I know some folks do.